Hey guys, here's a review for N.K. Jemisin's The Fifth Season, first in the Broken Earth trilogy, which I've been excited to read for a while now. It's recently won a Hugo Award, and it's easy to see why, for any faults it might have, and there are some. There's so much in this that's unique and more than worth your time. This was my first N.K. Jemisin book, but I'm looking forward now to reading everything else that she's written. Set on this world's single continent called the Stillness, a name that's exactly the opposite of what the land actually is, it being an unstable mess of seismic activity and unpredictable natural devastation, there are people with an ability called orogeny to influence and manipulate thermal and kinetic energy, tapping into the earth itself and the air all around for power and leverage against their push and pull and varying control over that seismic activity and those forms of energy. This allows them to not only cause or put a stopper on destructive seismic events, but curses them with abilities that, if left unchecked, could be fatal to all those around them. These people are called orogenes or rogas, derogatorily, and are often not seen as people. In this land, the orogenes are an enemy and a danger to be controlled, neutralized, gathered, and kept under watchful eyes. In other words, less than human. Monsters, or wrong. This story follows three separate threads, each with an orogene at its focus, that each seem kind of detached from the others, but give a great overall view of how orogenes do what they do, where they're sent, who holds control over them, how people of the world feel about them, how they feel about themselves, and the absolute destruction that they are capable of causing. When an orogene gets temperamental, shows any strong emotion, strong negative emotion at all, really, it can cause unpredictably dangerous things to happen outside of the orogene's will, depending on how well taught, controlled, and practiced they are in their power. We see a young orogene girl called Demaya with a family that's terrified of her, locked her in a barn after showing a hint of orogeny. One day, a man called Shefa, a guardian, someone that teaches, trains, dominates, and holds authority over orogenes due to special mysterious abilities they themselves have, comes to take Demaya away to the Fulcrum, a place where orogenes learn to master, or at the very least gain experience and some sort of control over their potentially destructive tendencies. Interwoven with Demaya's story is the life of a young woman named Cyanite, who's already at the Fulcrum and has been for some time. She's been told to join one of the most powerful orogenes, a 10-ringer, meaning the highest rank you can get from the Fulcrum. Cyanite herself is a 4-ringer, a man named Alabaster, on a trek to this community called Alia. They've got problems with their harbor that only an orogene can fix. Cyanite's been instructed also to breed with Alabaster, and this is seen as her duty to the Fulcrum. While orogene children may not be acceptable outside of the Fulcrum, children bred by two powerful orogenes such as Alabaster and Cyanite under its supervision are encouraged, and this sets off a sort of odd beginning precedent to their relationship that neither of them is a fan of. Lastly, and most notably, if you've heard this book spoken about, you've likely been told about this part, we follow the story of a more middle-aged woman named Essen, which is told to us in second person. Essen has forgotten, or more accurately repressed, her memories following a tragedy that befalls one of her children and that tears her family apart. She sets off on a journey that's narrated to her and to us by a mysterious and unknown source, constantly reminding her of things that have happened, things that she's done, things that she's thought, and seemingly helps her to remember where she's come from. Much of what we experience throughout this book is heavily influenced by the world building and the writing itself. These are the two main elements that N.K. Jemisin has decided to focus on. While Demaya and Cyanite's stories are fairly straightforward, there's a lot of what we must learn about this world and about orogeny when we get to see it in action, become privy to what it can do within these storylines, these two Demaya and Cyanite storylines, the devastation it can cause. And then in that third story, Essence, we are fully aware that a person's story is being told to us. And it's such a weird mix of immersive and jarring, but in many ways it works for me. The juxtaposition of this narrator's voice versus how that voice narrates Essen's thoughts and feelings and journey is in itself a sort of relationship, one that Essen doesn't seem to be fully aware of, but we get a full look into how she sees the world within her limited memory, as if this ever-present narrator is somehow seeing through her and then relating it back to her. Like I said, it can be a bit jarring, but it's also fulfilling, and that this voice obviously has much to tell us the readers, and Essen. Then the world building itself is especially well crafted, despite the many things that we don't know, things that even the characters don't seem to know. This feels like a fully fleshed out world and magic system that are really interconnected and dependent on one another. In fact, the world at times is treated as sentient itself. The people of this land cursed Father Earth, who hates them in return. There's a mythology there that really gives a sense of rivalry and loathing between this world and those that live on it, especially in that those who can connect with this world, the Origines, who can control different aspects of the world, are hated as well, not just by normal people, but by Father Earth above all. The Origines are often killed by their own communities and families, not even given the chance to be taken by a guardian to the Fulcrum. The discrimination and segregation there is palpable and a running theme that drives many characters' actions. Many of the lesser characters come across as rather flat, entirely one-sided, and wholly focused on that one-sidedness, but on the other hand, all of the main characters are so three-dimensional that they're borderline incoherent. They'll do one thing, feel another, and then say something totally unrelated. It does feel intentional, like the juxtaposition of all of these things is meant to inform our understanding of the character and their many complexities, and often it does, but at times it can be difficult to follow character motivation. I think that my biggest issue with this was the story. Within the first book, on its own, it's sort of incomplete. It's got 3 main narratives going, but within those is a set of events that just kind of happen with no real feel for an overarching rise and fall. There's a sort of climax to the whole thing, but it's not really as impactful as it wants to be because of all the different places the characters end up in. And much of the climax has to do with the fate of this certain place that we've barely seen. They've apparently been there for years, but we as a reader skip over that time because N.K. Jemisin skipped over that time in the narrative, and as a result, the characters they connect with and the place itself aren't established enough to feel the amount of empathy that we're meant to feel for it. This ultimately feels like a part to the story, which it is, and that's fine, but I prefer when series and trilogies like this each have their own well-defined plot, and this didn't have that. I don't think that it could stand on its own as a full story, which you might be fine with, but it bothered me a bit. Overall, this worked for me, and I'd recommend it to people that are fans of great world building and interesting storytelling techniques. There's twists in this that I wasn't expecting, not plot twists necessarily, more like twists in its form, which is especially cool, but I can see easily how you might be put off by the second-person storyline, or by the dreary, devastating nature of the world it takes place in, and if you end up just disliking the characters and the things they do, that might affect your ultimate enjoyment as well, as the book is completely dependent on how well you connect with these things specifically. I don't think that the story would be enough to sustain you if any or all of these things irk you. But I liked it, and I'm excited to read and review the second book as well, The Obelisk Gate, which just came out a couple months ago. So that's it. That's all my thoughts on the 5th season. If you've read the 5th season or read any part of the series, feel free to let me know what you feel about it. I'm sure it's got a lot of contrasting opinions because of the way it's told. I'd love to hear any thoughts you might have on it. If you're interested in reading the series at all, definitely let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you later with more.